Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up knowing that your job might kill you, curse you, or drive you slowly insane? Imagine the kind of exhaustion that does not come from overwork, but from sheer terror. The kind of job where death is not an accident, it is part of the routine. Before we descend together into this dark corridor of human history, take a few seconds to like this video, tell me where you are watching from, and subscribe if you are brave enough to make it to the end. Do it now, because after this story, you might not sleep the same way again. Now close your eyes, breathe slowly and picture this: a narrow cobblestone street in 17th century London, slick with rain and filth. The air reeks of smoke and decay. Rats scurry beneath your boots, their eyes glinting like tiny lanterns. A bell tolls from somewhere deep within the fog, each ring echoing like a heartbeat in the chest of a dying city. You see a man trudging toward you, pushing a wooden cart piled high with bodies wrapped in linen. His face is pale, his hands trembling, yet he hums softly, as if singing keeps him sane. That was his job. He was the plague barrier. For him, horror was not a story. It was Tuesday. History loves to glorify kings, generals, and men with golden crowns. But what about the others, the nameless ones who shoveled filth, carried corpses, and drained blood from the dead? Those who were never invited to the banquet of glory, but still served the feast of survival. The truth is, for every shining palace you have ever seen in a museum, there were hundreds of hands covered in dirt, sweat, and something far worse building it from the ground up. Those hands belonged to people whose jobs were so vile, so unbearable, that no one wanted to admit they existed. Yet without them, civilization would have collapsed. They were the ghost gears that kept the great machine of history turning. Some of them were feared, others were hated. Some were believed to be cursed, damned by God, or haunted by spirits. But all of them were human, breathing, dreaming, and suffering just like us. They laughed too, sometimes darkly, because humor is the last refuge of the doomed. Picture a man whose job was to eat sin. Literally. A piece of bread placed on the chest of a corpse, absorbing the dead person's guilt, and then eaten by a living man for a few coins. They called him the Sin Eater. People despised him, yet begged for his service when death came knocking. Or imagine a child sent into a narrow chimney, scraping soot from the walls until his lungs filled with ash. That was the chimney sweep boy. His reward, a meal and a cough that never left. There were night soil men who spent their nights wading through human waste under the streets, executioners whose blades fell so often they lost count of the heads, rat catchers who carried sacks of disease in exchange for silver. The irony was brutal. Society could not function without its nightmares. And maybe, just maybe, we have not changed as much as we think. The tools look different now. The settings are cleaner. But deep down, fear still fuels our labor. We still sacrifice our health, our sleep, sometimes even our souls for a paycheck, for survival, for belonging. Perhaps that is why these stories resonate even centuries later. Because they remind us that work has always demanded a price, and the receipt is often written in flesh. If you listen closely, you can still hear them, the sighs of the forgotten, a whisper carried on the wind from old graveyards and factory ruins, the murmurs of those who worked until their hearts stopped, whose names were erased, whose sweat turned into the dust beneath our feet. Tonight we will bring them back, not to glorify their pain but to understand it. You will meet the Sin Eater, the Night Soil Man, the Resurrectionist, and many others whose professions blur the line between necessity and nightmare. Their stories are grotesque, tragic, and sometimes even funny in the bleakest way possible. They make us question what we would be willing to endure if our survival depended on it. So I ask you, as you lie there in the dark with your phone or your headphones, what if you were born in their time? Would you dare to be the man who eats the sins of the dead, the boy who climbs into the choking throat of a chimney, the woman who paints the last portrait of a corpse? What would you do when every honest job reeked of death and every dishonest one paid better? Could you still call yourself innocent? The fog thickens, the bell tolls again, and history exhales its foul breath. You feel it on your skin, do not you? That cold draft that does not belong in your room, that is not the air conditioner. That is the past. It is here, whispering. It wants to be heard. So do not look away. Do not blink. Because the deeper we go, the harder it is to climb back. Welcome to the world where work was a nightmare. They say hunger changes a man, but what if hunger is not for food? but for forgiveness. Somewhere deep in the misty hills of old Wales and rural England, there once walked a man no priest would bless, no woman would touch, and no child dared to look in the eyes. He was called the Sin Eater. When someone died, the family would place a slice of bread and a bowl of ale upon the corpse's chest. The Sin Eater would come at dusk, silent as a shadow, sit beside the body and begin his dreadful meal. As he ate, the living whispered that every bite took the dead's sins into his own soul. Their greed, their cruelty, their blasphemy, he swallowed it all for a few pennies and a promise that he would never be buried in consecrated ground. It sounds absurd now, does not it? But in a time when heaven and hell were as real as sunrise and plague, people believed guilt had weight, and someone had to carry it away. The Sin Eater was that someone. Imagine the scene: a cold cottage, a dead man on a wooden table, candles flickering against the damp walls. The family weeps while trying not to look at the Sin Eater, whose clothes are stained and torn, whose eyes reflect the sorrow of 1,000 funerals. He mutters a prayer, but no one knows to whom, perhaps not even he. Then, as the bread vanishes, the air feels heavier, like something unseen has shifted from one soul to another. They say dogs would howl outside when it happened. Children hid under beds. Even the wind paused, as if listening. Some nights the Sin Eater would leave with crumbs stuck to his beard and a look of quiet terror, knowing that if he failed, the dead might follow him home. And yet he always came back. Why? Because hunger does not care about damnation. And in the shadow of famine and fear, even the devil's work paid better than starvation. There were whispers that some Sin Eaters began to change over time, not just spiritually, but physically. Their eyes grew sunken, their skin gray, their smell sour, as if decay clung to them from the inside. People claimed they could see faces flickering in the reflection of their pupils, faces of the dead whose sins they consumed. One story tells of a Sin Eater who refused to eat for a notorious murderer. He said the man's sins were too heavy, too black. That night his body was found near the river, his face twisted in horror, mouth stuffed with mud as if something had tried to force-feed him the guilt he would refused. Some said it was the spirit of the dead man seeking redemption. Others believed it was just the madness of poverty. Either way, the Sin Eater's legend spread like mold through the damp countryside. People feared him but needed him. That is the cruel irony of his existence. He was both savior and outcast. After all, who else would dare touch the cursed? Priests preached salvation, but the Sin Eater practiced it, one foul meal at a time. I sometimes wonder what it felt like to carry so many ghosts within one body, to taste bread soaked in grief, to drink ale thick with regret. Did he ever feel their memories creeping through his dreams? Did he see flashes of their crimes behind his eyelids as he tried to sleep? Maybe that is why they say he never smiled. There is something unsettling about a man who is never allowed to be pure again. If you met him on the road, he would lower his hat, never meeting your gaze, because one look could remind you of what you will become someday, another corpse, waiting for someone like him. And if you listened carefully, you might hear him whispering to himself, rehearsing his little prayer before each meal, "For thee and thine the peace be mine." 7 words that turned him into a walking graveyard of sins. Some scholars think the Sin Eater tradition was born from pagan rituals, older than Christianity itself, a blend of superstition and survival. Maybe he was not cursed by heaven, but by humanity's need to push guilt onto someone else. We have always needed scapegoats, have not we? Someone to absorb the darkness we pretend is not ours. But in doing so, we forget that monsters are often born from service, not evil. The Sin Eater was not wicked. He was necessary. His existence was proof that forgiveness had a price, and someone had to pay it. Now imagine you are there, in that flickering candlelight. The air is thick with the scent of tallow and old wood. The corpse's eyes are closed, but you swear you see them move. The Sin Eater sits, his shadow trembling across the wall. He takes a bite. The bread crunches softly. For a second, you think you hear a sigh escape from the dead man's lips. Maybe it is just the draft. Or maybe it is something else, leaving the room. Would you dare to finish that meal? Could you eat another's guilt, knowing that once you start, you will never be clean again? The bread, the ale, the silence, it all lingers long after the funeral ends. That is the thing about sin, it does not vanish. It just changes hands. And in those dark centuries, it was carried by men who had no choice but to devour it. You have seen the mask before, have not you? That long curved beak, the round glass eyes staring like an owl frozen in time. It has become a Halloween costume, a meme, a symbol of medieval superstition. But once it was not a joke. It was survival. The plague doctor. A figure born from desperation, half physician, half omen. Picture it, Europe, 1348. The Black Death slithers through villages, like invisible smoke. One day you wake up to the sound of church bells, again and again, until they stop because there is no one left to ring them. You step outside and the air itself feels sick. People collapse in the streets. The smell of rot hangs like a curtain over the world. That is when he appears, the man in black. Leather coat, gloves, boots, hat. A beak filled with herbs and vinegar. He does not speak. He does not comfort. He simply observes, writes something in his little book, and moves on to the next dying soul. Imagine seeing him walk down your street. You would know what it meant. Death was close. Some swore that wherever the plague doctor went, the disease followed, as if he carried it in his shadow. But here's the truth. He was one of the few who dared to look at the dying and not run. That mask, it was not just for show. The beak was stuffed with dried flowers, mint, myrrh, even juniper berries, anything thought to purify the air. The glass lenses protected the eyes from miasma, the invisible poison believed to cause illness. He carried a wooden cane, not to walk with, but to poke, inspect, or keep distance from the infected. And underneath that coat, his body was wrapped in layers of waxed fabric, sealing him like a human coffin. It is easy to laugh at the ignorance now, but think about it. What would you have done with no science, no medicine, no hope? You would cling to ritual, to myth, to anything that promised a sliver of control. The plague doctor became both savior and executioner. When he knocked on your door, it meant there was still a chance, but only just. Some were hired by cities, others by desperate townsfolk. They were paid in gold, sometimes in wine, sometimes with whatever could be spared. But their contracts often had one chilling clause: payment to be made only after the plague has ended. Many never collected. They died before their wages arrived. There is a story of one doctor in Italy who stayed in a city so long surrounded by death that when the plague finally passed, people discovered he had been dead for weeks, still sitting upright at his desk, quill in hand, mask unremoved. His notes were smudged with blackened fingerprints. Some claimed the ink had burned into the page by itself. You see, that is the strange thing about the plague doctor. He was not feared just for the disease, but for what he represented. He was the last human shape you would see before the world went dark, a walking symbol of fate. In some towns, children were told that if they misbehaved, the Birdman would come for them. In others, he became a figure of nightmares, the masked ghost that watched from alleyways long after the plague was gone. Even now, centuries later, the image lingers. Why? Maybe because it still speaks to something inside us. The fear of contagion, the unseen threat, the idea that safety can be an illusion stitched from leather, and false hope. Sometimes, when I look at that mask, I do not see a doctor. I see a confession, humanity trying to outsmart death with herbs and wax, pretending that knowledge is stronger than fear. But underneath that beak, behind those glass eyes, there was always a man who could still feel the weight of his own breath, the heat of fever, the trembling of his hands after a long day of counting bodies. Did he dream of the faces he saw? Did he hear the coughing in his sleep? Maybe that is why some of them kept journals, to prove they still existed beyond the mask, to remind themselves they were human. Others burned their clothes after every shift, afraid the sickness lived in the seams. A few simply vanished, walking out into the woods one day and never coming back. People said the mask consumed them, that after wearing it too long you could not take it off, that the leather fused with your skin, and the herbs inside rotted into your lungs. Folklore, maybe, but even folklore has roots in fear. Imagine standing alone in a silent town, surrounded by corpses, the only sound the rustle of your own coat. Would not you start hearing whispers too? Some claim the plague doctor's spirit still lingers in old European cities. Travelers in Venice or Prague tell of seeing a figure in black watching from rooftops, head tilted like a crow waiting to feast. Maybe it is just the wind playing tricks. Or maybe the dead never really gave up their doctor. And now, as you listen to this, with the faint hum of your own breath in your ears, ask yourself, if death wore a mask, would you recognize it, or would you mistake it for someone trying to save you? The candle burns low, The air grows colder, and the echo of that beak still cuts through time. Do not worry. It is just a story. At least, that is what we tell ourselves when the shadow in the corner looks back. If hell had a smell, it would be this. Picture London before plumbing, before flushing toilets, before anyone thought waste should go anywhere except the ground beneath their own homes. Under those crooked streets lay rivers of filth, thick, bubbling, alive. And when night fell, when the city slept and pretended its own stench did not exist, a new kind of man went to work. They were called the night soil men. Their job, to climb down into the cesspits beneath the city and remove by hand the mountain of human waste that had collected for months or years. You can almost hear it now. The slow splash of boots in liquid darkness, the scrape of an iron shovel, the quiet cough of a man who knows that if he slips he will drown in humanity's forgotten sins. They worked by candlelight, their faces smeared with soot and sweat, the smell clinging to them like a curse that never washed off. No perfume, no soap, no rain could erase it. The city above slept soundly, dreaming in silk sheets, while below men waded through excrement to keep civilization from choking on its own filth. It is strange, is not it, how comfort always stands on someone else's suffering. During the day, no one spoke to them. If a night soil man passed on the street, people crossed to the other side. Children threw stones. Women covered their noses. Yet when the sewers overflowed, when the smell of rot rose through the cobblestones, everyone prayed they would come. Society could not survive without its ghosts of the underground. They were paid little, sometimes in ale, sometimes in food, but their knowledge of the city's hidden veins was unmatched. They knew every alley, every tunnel, every secret door. Rumor said some used that knowledge to smuggle goods or corpses for extra coin. Who would suspect the man covered in filth, one more smell in a city of decay? There is a tale from 1830 about a night soil crew in Holborn who went missing. The townsfolk thought they would fled with the money, but weeks later, when another team descended, they found nothing left but shovels and a half-burned candle floating on the black surface. Some said the gases had swallowed them whole. Others whispered about something older living down there, something that fed on the things people flushed away, the shame, the secrets, the sickness. After all, what better hiding place for monsters than beneath the feet of those who pretend to be clean? Imagine their lungs after years of breathing methane and rot. Imagine their hands cracked and blistered, nails eaten by acid. They would drink heavily to numb the stench, to forget the texture of what they touched. Some went blind. Some simply stopped speaking. But here's the dark twist: many lived longer than the rich. The constant exposure hardened them. Their immune systems became fortresses. The aristocrats above died of fevers, while the men in the muck kept shoveling. Irony drips as thick as the sludge they swam through. Sometimes, when the night was quiet, they would surface for air. They said the stars looked different from the bottom of a cesspit, like holes punched through heaven to remind them there was still light somewhere. A few even found beauty in it. At least down there, one man supposedly said, no one pretends they are clean. That line stayed with me. Maybe that is what makes the night soil men more than just a disgusting footnote in history. They were brutally honest about the world's dirt, literally and metaphorically. They handled what everyone else denied existed. The filth was not just waste. It was a reflection of human nature. We build golden towers, but the base is always brown. And yet, for all their horror, there is a strange dignity in what they did. They made cities livable. They faced the unfaceable. Without them, disease would have swallowed entire nations. But no monument bears their names. No one writes songs for the men who cleaned the world's shame. Only whispers remain. Some say if you walk near old London's sewers at night and the wind blows just right, you can hear the faint clinking of shovels, the murmur of tired voices echoing through the tunnels. Maybe they are still working, trapped between worlds, cleaning a city that never stops producing filth. Or maybe it is just the pipes groaning with memory. Either way, the next time you flush, pause for a second. Think about the men who did it before you, with buckets, with shovels, with bare hands. And remember that civilization does not smell of progress. It smells of denial. So, if you ever catch a foul scent drifting through the dark, do not cover your nose too quickly. That is not just the sewer. That is history breathing. The dead were supposed to rest, but in the 18th and 19th centuries, they rarely got the chance. Their bodies had value, more than their lives ever did. And so, when the moon was high, and the fog rolled thick over the graveyards of London, Edinburgh, and Dublin, the earth itself began to move. The resurrectionists were at work. They were grave robbers, body snatchers, men who turned death into a business. But unlike thieves who stole for gold, they dug for flesh. Their clients were not dark magicians or cultists, but doctors. Medical schools paid handsomely for cadavers to dissect. Anatomy was the future of science, and yet the law forbade doctors from using any body except that of an executed criminal. But executions were few, and curiosity was endless. So the resurrectionists filled the gap, one shovel at a time. Picture the scene: a cold night in Edinburgh, mist curling over the headstones, the crunch of spades cutting into wet soil. Two men work quickly, whispering curses under their breath, glancing around for the constable's lantern. They unearth the coffin, hook it with ropes, and pry open the lid. The smell hits first, sweet, cloying human. They gag, but keep going. They strip the corpse of clothes because stealing garments was considered theft, but stealing the body itself was not technically illegal. A loophole written in rot. They wrap the naked form in burlap and vanish into the dark, leaving the grave looking untouched by dawn. By morning, the cadaver lies on a table, ready to be cut open by students who never ask where it came from. For the resurrectionists, the money was good. A single body could feed a family for a month. But the risks were high. If caught, they faced beatings, imprisonment, or worse, the wrath of the townsfolk. Grave robbing offended something primal. People feared their loved ones would not find peace, that their souls would wander lost without their bodies. Families started guarding graves with iron cages called mort safes, or hired watchers to stand vigil. Some even rigged coffins with guns or explosives. Yet the resurrectionists persisted. Fear, after all, is no match for hunger. But not all were content to wait for natural deaths. Two men, Burke and Hare, changed everything. In 1828 Edinburgh, they discovered a quicker way to supply cadavers: make them. They lured drunks and beggars into their lodging house, suffocated them, and sold the bodies to the famous Drive. Knox for anatomy lectures. 16 victims later, the city finally caught on. Burke was executed and dissected in public. Poetic justice, the crowd said. His skin was turned into a notebook, still preserved today. But the trade did not stop. It just went deeper underground. Imagine being one of those men. Every time you dig, you hear your own heart pounding louder than your shovel. The cold earth fights you. Roots tangle around your arms like fingers trying to hold you back. You work fast because the ground seems to breathe, and you swear you can hear voices, muffled, faint, as if the dead are whispering complaints about being disturbed. The worst part is not the digging. It is the waiting. Standing there as your partner lowers a rope into the darkness, and you feel the coffin rise, inch by inch, heavy and wet. You do not look inside. You never look. You tell yourself it is just a body, no different from a sack of grain. But when you hand it over for money, you can't shake the feeling that something unseen followed you home. Some resurrectionists claimed they were haunted by dreams. Visions of open graves, cold hands clutching at their throats, faces pressing against their bedroom windows at night. Maybe guilt, maybe gas leaking from the pits, maybe something else. They drank to forget. Some stopped sleeping entirely. The most superstitious among them carried charms, crosses, iron nails, a bit of salt, to keep the restless spirits away. But ghosts were not their only problem. Sometimes rival gangs would steal their haul. Sometimes the coffins contained surprises, diseased corpses, mutilated limbs, or worse, someone not quite dead. There are stories, half-whispered, of coffins shifting as they were opened, of eyes flicking open, of muffled gasps echoing from underground. No one ever stayed to check twice. They would flee, convinced they would dug up the wrong kind of treasure. When dawn came, the church bells would ring, and the resurrectionists would vanish into the city's alleys, faces smeared with dirt, pockets heavy with coin, hearts heavier still. By daylight they were invisible, bricklayers, butchers, dockhands. But come nightfall, they returned to the graves, servants of both science and sin. And you have to wonder, was it worth it? Did the progress of medicine justify the desecration of peace? Without them, anatomy might have remained a mystery for another century. With them, humanity learned how its own body worked, but at the cost of its soul. Perhaps that is why cemeteries still feel so uneasy after midnight. The earth remembers. The soil does not forget the hands that violated it. And if you listen closely enough while walking past an old graveyard, when the wind carries that cold, wet scent of earth freshly turned, you might hear the faint clatter of shovels below, and a voice whispering, "It is just science." But you know better. That sound is not the wind. It is history digging itself up again. Before the word exterminator existed, there were the rat catchers, men who hunted disease with their bare hands in alleys where the light never reached. London, Paris, Berlin. Every great city owed its survival to these unsung soldiers of filth. Imagine a time when rats ruled the streets, their tiny claws scratching across cobblestones, their squeaks echoing through the night like a chorus of warning. They devoured grain, gnawed through walls, and carried something far deadlier in their blood, the fleas that spread plague. And yet it was not scientists or nobles who stood between humanity and extinction. It was a man with a sack, a stick, and nerves of iron. The rat catcher's life was a dance with pestilence. He knew the alleys better than the constables, could smell infestation before anyone else. Some said he could hear rats breathing. He would arrive at dawn, a silhouette in a tattered coat, a belt full of traps, and a grin too wide for comfort. Children feared him, yet followed him, drawn to the thrill of his work. He would kneel, whisper something into a drain, and moments later, movement. A squeal. Then silence. One less threat to the city above. But of course, one never meant much. There were millions. The rat catchers were not just pest control, they were necessary evils. They dealt in creatures that no one wanted to see, let alone touch. And because of that, they became something halfway between man and myth. Some claimed they made pacts with the rats. How else, people whispered, could they know where the nests are, how to find the queen? In parts of Germany, it was said that rat catchers kept pet rats that guided them like familiars. In folklore, one of them became legend, the Pied Piper of Hamelin, a man who led rats to their deaths with music until betrayed, and in revenge, led the town's children away instead. It sounds like a fairy tale, but fairy tales are born from truth. Maybe the Piper was one of these men, a rat catcher who realized his power was not in traps or poison, but in control. If you can command the plague, you can command fear itself. Think about it. A man who holds life and death in his hands, who knows the tunnels beneath every home, the hidden places where rats breed. That is not just a job, it is leverage. In some cities, the rat catchers were paid by bounty, coin for every tail or carcass. So of course, some bred their own rats to collect more money. Human greed always finds a way. Others became heroes during outbreaks, walking through the streets like grim angels, faces wrapped in cloth, carrying cages filled with squealing prizes. The sound of their carts was both relief and horror. Relief, because it meant someone was fighting the vermin. Horror, because it meant the vermin were everywhere. Imagine the smell, fur, sweat, decay. The way the rats writhed in the cages, eyes shining like tiny black pearls. Some rat catchers became collectors, preserving their kills as trophies, stuffing and selling them to curious gentlemen who wanted to impress dinner guests with a touch of the macabre. Others performed for crowds, showing off their skills. One man in Victorian London was famous for letting live rats crawl over him while he played a fiddle, laughing as they ran up his arms. They called him King Rat. He died of infection, of course, but his legend lingered. There is something disturbingly charming about these men, half hero, half fool. They flirted with death and made it look like work. They were the first line of defense in a war no one wanted to fight. And deep down, maybe they enjoyed it. One can only face horror so long before learning to love it. Some believed rat catchers were immune to plague, blessed or cursed depending on who you asked. Science would call it luck, but whispers say otherwise. There is a story of a catcher who, after years of killing, began to change. His teeth sharpened. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. They said he could speak in squeaks. That he vanished one night into the sewers, followed by thousands of rats, never to be seen again. From then on, whenever outbreaks began, people blamed him, the Rat King of the Underground, commanding his army to punish the ungrateful. Even today, in some old districts of London, sewer workers tell stories of shadows that move without sound, of hundreds of glowing eyes watching from the tunnels. They say if you whistle softly, something whistles back. Rationally, it is nonsense. But the rational mind is useless when you hear skittering behind the walls at midnight. And you know, somewhere deep down, that you are outnumbered. The rat catchers understood that fear better than anyone. They lived it. They profited from it. They were both saviors and symbols of everything society tried to forget, that filth breeds life and life breeds filth. So tonight, if you hear scratching behind your ceiling, do not rush to set a trap. Stop. Listen. That sound is older than your house, older than your bloodline. It is the heartbeat of civilization itself. And if you listen long enough, you might catch another sound too. A faint chuckle from the dark where a man in a tattered coat whispers, "Do not worry, love. I have got them all under control." Then silence. But the scratching never really stops. They say every man's job leaves a mark on him. For the executioner, the mark was invisible, but it never washed away. His hands looked ordinary enough, strong, calloused, steady, but when he touched something it carried the chill of death. Picture a cold morning in medieval Europe. The square is crowded. Mothers hold their children close, men whisper prayers, and above them all stands the scaffold, slick with morning dew and something darker. The executioner waits silent, face hidden beneath a hood that is half legend, half necessity. He is not a monster. He is a civil servant, paid by the crown, sworn to uphold the law through steel. But laws are written by men who never hold the axe. Imagine standing there, waiting for the condemned to arrive, hearing the crowd's breath thicken like fog. You smell sweat, fear, and wood smoke. Somewhere a priest murmurs final rites. Then footsteps, slow, heavy, dragging. The prisoner climbs the steps, pale as wax, eyes darting toward the blade. And the executioner, calm as stone, raises his weapon. His heart does not pound. It sinks. He knows what is coming. One swing, and it is over. But it is never really over, is it? The first time, it is work. The 10th, it is routine. The 100th, it starts to follow you home. People think of him as cruel, but most were not. Many were kind, even pious. Some prayed for the souls they killed. Others wept in secret afterward, scrubbing the blood from their arms until their skin bled too. But society needed them. Someone had to do the job nobody wanted. In many towns, the executioner lived at the edge, both protected and shunned. Children threw stones at his door. Merchants refused him service. Yet if he died, chaos followed. No one else would take his place. That is the curse of his trade, indispensable and despised. The irony, they often inherited the role. Executioners passed the profession to their sons, generation after generation, binding the family to death's peril. Imagine being born into that legacy. The town already knows your name, and it is spoken like a warning. Some children of executioners grew up lonely, playing in empty fields while others ran from them. But behind the gallows, they learned anatomy better than doctors. They studied the human neck, the perfect angle, the cleanest strike. It was not cruelty, it was precision. The fewer swings, the fewer screams. A good executioner was merciful. A bad one was infamous. There are stories, whispered in the taverns, of botched jobs, axes dull, hands shaking, blood spraying like rain. One tale tells of an executioner who missed 3 times before finishing the task, his blade clanging against bone. The crowd booed and he fled town, leaving his mask behind. They found him years later, in a monastery, sweeping floors in silence. The monks said he never spoke again. Others embraced their grim fame. In France, during the Revolution, the Sanson family became celebrities. They executed kings and traitors alike, their names synonymous with justice or vengeance, depending on who you asked. One Sanson reportedly wept as he lifted Louis Exvis' head for the crowd. "Forgive me, sire," he whispered, "this is my duty." That phrase haunted him until he died. What does duty mean when it is soaked in blood? Did they believe they were serving God, or just feeding the machine of fear, perhaps both? Some executioners claimed to feel the souls leave the body, a chill wind brushing their cheeks after each swing. A few began drinking heavily, unable to sleep without nightmares. In rare moments, they swore they saw the faces of the condemned in candle flames, lips moving as if whispering their names. Maybe guilt, maybe ghosts. But one way or another, every blade remembers. There is a legend of an executioner who forged his own sword and named it Mercy. He said the blade spoke to him, urging him to strike quickly. When he died, they buried the sword beside him, but decades later, the grave was found empty, no sword, no bones. Just the imprint of a blade in the dirt. Some say he was taken to the other side to keep cutting souls loose. Romantic, perhaps, but eerie all the same. You see, Death is an intimate thing. It is not a spectacle, no matter how many come to watch. For the executioner, it is personal. Every heartbeat before the swing belongs to him. Every breath afterward is silence he created. And yet he must live with it, eat with it, sleep beside it. His axe, his rope, his guillotine, they were extensions of his will and his curse. The people who spat at him by day secretly thanked him by night for keeping order. Without him, vengeance would rule. But with him, justice always came wearing a hood. When you think about it, maybe the executioner was not the monster. Maybe the crowd was, the ones who watched, cheered, demanded blood, then went home pretending their hands were clean. Maybe he was the only honest one among them. The man who did not look away. And you, if it were you, could you lift the blade? Could you swing knowing the eyes beneath you would be the last thing you ever saw alive? Would you do it for the law, for survival, for peace, or would you flinch, hand trembling, as the crowd screams for an ending? The blade does not care. It only falls. It always falls. And somewhere in the dark, long after the cheers fade, the executioner whispers to the silence, "One day it will be my turn." The air grows colder when he says it. Maybe he is right. There was a time when people believed that every illness, every fever, madness, or heartbreak came from too much blood. And if blood was the problem, the cure was simple: take it out. But how? Not with knives or cups alone. No, nature had its own little surgeons, leeches. And someone had to gather them. That someone was the leech collector. Imagine a foggy marsh at dawn, the kind of silence that hums in your bones. A woman wades into the water barefoot, her skirt tied at the knees. The mud sucks at her feet as she moves slowly, carefully. The trick is to make the blood flow just enough to draw them out. She hums, maybe to keep herself brave, maybe to fool herself into thinking it is just another morning. Then she feels it, the first touch. Cold. Slippery. The leech curls around her ankle, latches on, begins to feed. Then, another. And another. Within minutes, her legs are black with writhing shapes. That is how she earns her living. She waits until they are full, until her own blood drips into the swamp, before prying them off and dropping them into a jar. The jars clink softly, a sound halfway between coins and bones. That is her salary. For every jar she fills, she buys another day of bread. The leech collector's life was one of quiet horror, swallowed by mud and monotony. Most were poor women, widows, or the desperate. Some brought their children along, teaching them which parts of the body the leeches liked best. Doctors and apothecaries paid by the dozen, and demand never stopped. In the 1800s, France alone used millions every year. Bloodletting was medicine's favorite lie, a cure for everything from headaches to heartbreak. They said the leeches balanced the humors. What they really did was feed. But no one asked where they came from, just as no one asks today where suffering is sourced. As long as the bottle arrives clean, the world forgets the hands that filled it. There is something poetic and cruel about it, healing born from hunger. Some collectors claimed they could feel the leeches whispering as they fed, tiny voices in their veins. One woman in Lancashire swore that after years of work, the leeches began to follow her home, crawling up her walls, waiting by her bed. She said she could feel them inside her dreams, drinking from her even while she slept. No one believed her, until her body was found, drained pale, with dozens of leeches clinging to her skin. She must have fallen asleep with her jars open, they said. Maybe. Or maybe something else had learned the taste of her. You see, leeches are strange creatures. They can live for months without feeding, but once they have tasted blood, they remember it. They follow warmth, vibration, the pulse of life. A good leech collector knew this. She moved like prey, pretending to be predator. The longer she worked, the less human she seemed, her skin puckered with scars, her movements slow and deliberate, like something that lived between land and water. Some said they could smell her coming, that her clothes reeked of iron and decay. Children called her the Blood Witch. Men avoided her path, but came knocking when sickness struck. Is not it funny how desperation makes people forget disgust? The same hands that scooped leeches from her legs were trusted to bring healing to their children. The line between monster and savior blurred in the swamp mist. Science would later prove that leeches had their uses, that their saliva thinned blood, prevented clots. Modern medicine still employs them in surgery today. But the collectors, the women knee-deep in sludge, never saw the glory. They lived and died in the margins, forgotten by the very doctors who made fortunes from their suffering. There is one more story, an old English folktale about a collector who found a leech so large it could fill a bucket on its own. She thought she would struck gold. She trapped it in a wooden barrel and carried it home, but at night she heard movement inside, a wet slithering sound. The next morning the barrel was empty, the floor soaked red. Her husband was gone. Some say the leech grew enormous on his blood and slipped back to the marsh, waiting for the next fool who thought they could profit from hunger. Others say she made it up to hide the murder. Either way, no one saw her again. Sometimes I think about those women, their bare legs, their trembling candles, their quiet songs drifting over the fog. There is a certain peace in it, is not there? The acceptance of pain as currency. Every bite, every scar was an exchange, her blood for someone else's health. A simple, terrible economy. Even now the image lingers, a jar filled with dark, twisting bodies, pressing against the glass like thoughts you can't contain. And in the faint hum of your veins, if you listen closely, you might swear you hear them too, whispering your pulse back to you, softly saying, "We are still hungry." Every kingdom has its throne, and every throne has its waste. In the glittering courts of medieval England, kings and nobles feasted on roasted boar, fine wine, and glory. But when the banquets ended, someone had to deal with what came after. Enter the gong farmer, a man whose title sounded almost noble, but whose work was anything but. Gong, you see, was the polite old English word for human excrement, and the gong farmer's duty was simple. He cleaned out the cesspits beneath castles, manors, and towns. He was quite literally the king of filth. Imagine it. It is midnight, the air thick with summer heat, and beneath the cobblestones lies a labyrinth of pits overflowing with the waste of thousands. That is when the gong farmer begins his shift. He climbs down a narrow ladder into the dark, holding a small lantern whose light barely cuts through the fumes. The air burns his eyes, the stench hits his stomach like a fist. One deep breath and it is too late to turn back. Down there, sound is different. The world muffled, heavy, alive. He scrapes and shovels, filling buckets with sludge, passing them up to his partner above. Sometimes the air grows thick with gas, and a single spark can turn the pit into an inferno. Some farmers never come back up. Others suffocate quietly, their lungs filling with the very thing they were paid to remove. Yet every morning, the city smells a little cleaner, because of them. By dawn he is finished, his clothes soaked through, his skin stained in ways that never fully fade. He earns more than most laborers. Danger has its price, but the cost is isolation. No one shakes his hand. No one invites him to church. Children point and laugh. He smells too human for the rest of humanity. Yet, ironically, without him, civilization itself would drown. The gong farmer worked at night because daylight made the job unbearable. Heat stirred the gases, made them volatile. So they became creatures of the dark, ghosts with shovels. People swore they could hear them singing sometimes, low mournful songs drifting through sewer grates. Maybe it was to keep rhythm. Maybe to remind themselves they were still alive. The city above had no idea what went on below. There were stories, of course. Whispers that in the deepest tunnels things lived among the waste, rats the size of dogs, strange pale shapes that moved without sound. One farmer told of finding a tunnel that led nowhere, filled with bones. Not animal, he said, and not fresh. No one believed him. Who listens to the man who smells of filth? Yet that story spread, like the stench itself, impossible to contain. Some said the pits beneath old London connected to the catacombs, that the city's waste and its dead shared the same resting place. Imagine that, the dead and the discarded mingling together, forgotten by those who lived comfortably above. The gong farmer was the only witness. Sometimes he would find rings, coins, even bones while digging. He kept them. Tiny treasures from the city's underbelly, proof that filth and fortune are not so different. He would joke, dark humor was his only shield. Everything ends up here, he would say. Kings, beggars, and what they leave behind. And he was not wrong. The gong farmers saw the truth of life more clearly than any priest. Everything we build, every feast, every lie of luxury, eventually rots. It all flows down to the pits, down to the shovel, down to him. There is a peculiar power in that, is not there? While nobles built monuments, he held the real foundations, the guts of the city. Without him, disease would rise, streets would flood, civilization itself would collapse. Yet history remembers his work as shameful. It has always been that way. We despise what sustains us. Centuries later, sanitation became science. Pipes replaced pits and the gong farmers vanished, but their ghosts remain. In some old castles, workers claim to hear dripping where there should not be any, or smell something foul when no pipes leak. They say it is the gong farmers, still doing their rounds, eternally cleaning the sins of the living. I wonder, sometimes, if they knew the irony of it all. The men who kept the world clean were considered the dirtiest of all. The world above never thanked them, but the ground did. The earth remembers everything we feed it. And if you stand on old stone streets on a humid night, you might feel the faintest tremor beneath your feet, a rhythm steady and slow, like shovels scraping through time. Listen closely. Civilization still runs on waste. The only difference now is we have built walls high enough not to smell it. There was a time when the dead of Egypt became the entertainment of Europe. Imagine candlelit parlors filled with laughter, the clink of teacups, the rustle of silk dresses, and in the center of it all, a corpse wrapped in linen waiting to be stripped bare. They called them mummy unwrapping parties. Yes, it was exactly what it sounds like. Wealthy Victorians bought real Egyptian mummies and gathered their friends to watch as someone, often a self-proclaimed scholar or showman, peeled back the wrappings layer by layer. The guests leaned closer, holding scented handkerchiefs to their noses as the smell of centuries-old resin filled the room. Somewhere between science and spectacle, reverence and desecration, it was the perfect mix of horror and curiosity. The mummy unwrapper stood at the center of it, a ringmaster of the macabre. He was not a villain, at least not in his own eyes. He was a man of learning, of culture, revealing the mysteries of the ancient world. Or so he said. But beneath that polished voice and academic flourish was hunger, the same hunger that drove grave robbers, collectors, and conquerors. The hunger to possess the past, to control it, to turn death into decoration. Picture the moment, the final layers coming off, the linen falling away like pale snow. The room holds its breath. And then the face, sunken, shriveled, lips drawn back in a soundless scream. Some guests gasp, others applaud. The mummy unwrapper smiles, proud of his performance. He points out details, the amulets, the oils, the ancient script still etched on skin. Behold the wisdom of the ancients, he says, as if he is honoring the dead. But he is not. He is feeding on them. The Victorians were obsessed with Egypt. They saw its tombs as treasure chests, its mummies as curiosities. They ground mummy dust into medicine, mixed it into paint, even wore fragments as lucky charms. The past became fashion, and the dead became supply. Museums filled their halls with stolen coffins, while parlors filled their evenings with polite horror. It is strange, is not it, how civilization, for all its refinement, still craves the thrill of desecration. The mummy unwrapper understood that better than anyone. He was both scientist and showman, priest and butcher. He told himself it was education, but deep down he knew it was theater. And like all performers, he began to believe in his act. Some said the dead noticed, that the air in those rooms grew colder when the final bandages came off. Guests sometimes fainted. Some swore they saw the eyes move, the lips twitch, as if the body remembered its humiliation. There is a story from London in 1842 about a famous unwrapper who held a grand event for nobles and intellectuals. Halfway through, as he cut into the wrappings, his lantern flickered out. When light returned, he was gone. Only the mummy remained, its hands now resting over its chest, though no one had touched them. The crowd left in silence. A week later, his body was found near the docks, throat packed with sand. His colleagues called it coincidence. The servants called it justice. Science called it nonsense. But the whisper of that night lingered like dust. The truth is, these unwrappings were not rare. They were entertainment, like ghost stories with real corpses. Some unwrappers even sold small fragments of skin or bone afterward, as souvenirs. Pieces of eternity, they would call them. The guests would take them home, tuck them in drawers, forget them, until something strange began to happen. Footsteps in the hall. Sand on the floor in the morning. A faint scent of incense that no one could explain. It is superstition, of course, but superstition has roots. The ancient Egyptians believed that disturbing a body disturbed the soul, that to break the seal of a tomb was to invite the dead to follow. And what are we if not proof that history always follows the living? You can almost imagine it now. The unwrapping, the snapping of brittle linen, the murmur of the crowd. What would you have done? Would you have looked away or leaned closer? Would you have laughed nervously, telling yourself it was only science? Or would you have felt that strange pull, that morbid curiosity, that whisper in your mind that says, "Keep watching, because that is the truth"? We are all a little like the mummy unwrapper. We peel away layers of the past, searching for beauty, for knowledge, for meaning. But what we find beneath is never just bones. It is consequence. Maybe that is why, even now, the image of that maskless face lingers in our imagination. Maybe that is why museums feel colder at night. When you walk past a sarcophagus under dim light, you might feel eyes on you. You tell yourself it is the air conditioning. It is not. It is the past remembering your breath. And if you listen closely, really closely, you might hear a voice from the dust whisper, "You wanted to see me. Now you never stop seeing." Before electricity, before kerosene, before the soft hum of light bulbs, the world was lit by death. Not by candles, not by miracles, but by oil carved from the bodies of giants. The whale oil renderers, men who turned the ocean's most majestic creatures into light, were the silent executioners of the sea. Imagine the endless black horizon of the 19th century Arctic, the frozen air sharp enough to slice skin. A whaling ship rocks on icy waves, its crew gaunt, eyes hollow from months away from land. Then someone shouts, "There she blows," and the hunt begins. The harpoons fly. The water churns red. The creature thrashes, its cries, yes, whales do cry, echoing like thunder beneath the surface. Hours later, it floats, lifeless, a mountain of flesh waiting to be harvested. And the renderers go to work. They strip the blubber with long knives, hacking through layers of fat that steam in the cold. The decks turn slick, the air thick with the sweet, nauseating stench of oil. They lower the chunks into massive cauldrons called trypots, heated day and night. The blubber boils, bubbles, hisses, melting into a golden liquid that will one day fuel lamps in London, Paris, New York. Whale oil, the light of civilization born from darkness and slaughter. The men move like machines. They stir the vats, wipe the sweat and grease from their eyes, and ignore the way the smell clings to their skin, to their souls. Even the seagulls avoid them. The tryworks glow like a floating hell, red fire beneath a canopy of stars. The sound is a constant symphony of bubbling, sizzling, burning. Some said you could hear the whales screaming in the hiss of the pots. "It is just steam," the captain would say, but the crew knew better. At night, they swore the ship moved differently, as if the ocean itself resented them. One man claimed he saw shapes in the mist, massive shadows gliding just below the surface, following the ship for days. "They are watching," he whispered. "Waiting." No one laughed. Because deep down, every renderer knew the ocean never forgets. They lived between two worlds, the infinite above and the abyss below. On deck, they worked in blood and fire. Below they slept among barrels of oil, the smell so strong it seeped into dreams. Some said they could taste it in their food, feel it in their lungs. A few went mad, convinced the whale spirits had entered them through the fumes. One night a young sailor leapt overboard, screaming that he saw eyes staring up from the depths, eyes that blinked. When they pulled him back, he was laughing, his hands slick with oil, whispering, "They are still burning." He died the next day, lungs full of salt. The ship sailed on. That is the cruelty of the trade. Every lamp that flickered warmly in a parlor, every page read by soft yellow light, was paid for with sweat, blood, and extinction. But they did not see it that way. They believed they were taming the ocean, turning chaos into progress. Civilization, after all, has always been powered by sacrifice. Still, some nights when the rendering fires burned too hot and the air grew thick with smoke, strange things happened. The compasses spun, the winds died, and the men heard sounds, low groans rising from the black water, deep enough to shake the hull. "It is the ice shifting," the captain said. But the crew did not believe him. They started leaving offerings on deck, pieces of bread, coins, even drops of their own blood, trying to appease whatever ancient force they had angered. One old harpooner told a story of a ghost ship made entirely of bone, crewed by the souls of the slaughtered, its sails dripping oil. He claimed that on nights when the sea was still, you could smell it before you saw it, a sickly sweetness, like cooked fat and rot. Those who smelled it never returned from their next voyage. Science dismissed such tales, of course, but sailors do not need proof to know what haunts them. When the rendering was done, when the last pot cooled and the barrels were sealed, the men stood proud. Their work lit cities, fueled empires, drove the wheels of industry. Yet when they came ashore, no one would stand near them. The smell clung to their clothes, their hair, their very breath. It said, "I have touched the furnace of the sea. I have burned life for light." They were ghosts in daylight, haunted by the glow they would created. And maybe in some twisted way, they were right to feel pride. Without them, the world might have stayed dark. But every flame has a cost. Sometimes on quiet nights by the ocean, when the wind shifts and the salt air carries a faint, oily tang, it almost feels like the whales are still burning, tiny echoes of their suffering flickering in every light that ever shone because of them. Look at the horizon. Do you see that faint shimmer? That is not the sunset. That is history, still smoldering. War leaves behind more than smoke and silence, it leaves bodies. Thousands of them, buried under mud, tangled in wire, hidden in forests and fields. And when the wind changes, the dead begin to speak, not in words but in smell. That is where the body sniffers came in. They were the men who could find death by scent alone. Imagine the trenches of World War I, the earth soaked in rain and blood. The air is heavy, sweet, metallic. Somewhere out there, beyond the barbed wire, lies a fallen soldier, one among countless others. Families want closure. Armies want order. And so a man climbs from the trench, clutching a cloth to his face, and follows the stench of decay through the no man's land. His title is not glorious. His pay is minimal. But his job is vital, to locate the unburied dead before disease finds them first. The body sniffer walks slowly, methodically. Each gust of wind brings information, some faint, some overwhelming. He can tell how long a body's been dead by the tone of the odor, sharp for the fresh, sweet for the rotting, dull for the long gone. He moves like a hound, trained by tragedy. Soldiers joke about him, call him the ghoul, but they keep their distance. No one wants his scent on them. And when he returns to camp, even his shadow smells like death. Some of these men were volunteers, others conscripted gravediggers. They would search battlefields days after combat, when the flies had settled and the soil began to bubble. They did not use instruments, just instinct. The human nose, it turns out, is an incredible detector of decay, if you can stand it. Most could not. Some fainted. Some went mad. But the body sniffers endured, because someone had to. They marked the ground with flags or chalk, calling in burial crews to dig. They worked alone, surrounded by silence broken only by crows. One step too far, and a mine could erase them completely. One wrong breath, and disease could rot their lungs. It is strange how something so essential can feel so cursed. They gave peace to the dead, yet no one thanked them. The soldiers buried under clean white crosses owed their dignity to men who never saw their own names recorded. When the war ended, the body sniffers vanished like ghosts. No medals, no recognition, just memories that clung like the smell they could not wash off. Some went home and found themselves haunted not by visions but by scents. A whiff of spoiled meat, damp soil, or rain on iron would send them spiraling back to the fields. One wrote in his diary, "Every storm smells like the fallen calling me back." Others turned reclusive, terrified that they could still smell the living the way they once smelled the dead. Imagine that, sitting on a bus and catching the faint odor of something familiar, something not quite right. You turn, and the person beside you looks perfectly healthy. But you know better. You smell it, the scent of skin about to die, of blood that has forgotten how to flow. A few claimed they could predict death that way, a superstition, maybe. But the mind has its own battlefield. Some took jobs in morgues afterward, drawn to what they already knew. One man became a perfumer, of all things, said he wanted to replace the smell in his head with something beautiful. He died surrounded by roses, they say, but his assistant swore that when he opened the coffin, the scent was not flowers, it was soil. There is something profoundly lonely about the body sniffer. He existed in a world between worlds, a servant of both life and death. Soldiers marched past him, nurses prayed beside him, priests blessed the graves he marked, yet no one wanted to share his air. He bore humanity's most primal fear, the smell of mortality. And maybe that is why we do not talk about them now. It is easier to remember the heroes who charged into fire than the ones who followed behind, counting the consequences. The body finds ways to protect itself from horror. The mind builds walls, but scent seeps through. It lingers. You can't unsmell death once you have met it. Even now, if you close your eyes and inhale, can you sense it, That faint note beneath the perfume, the food, the rain, it is there, subtle, patient. The world is never entirely free of it. Every cemetery, every battlefield, every old hospital exhales it in whispers. We just pretend not to notice. The body sniffers did not have that luxury. They made the invisible visible, the unbearable tangible. They turned horror into data, grief into duty. Their noses were both curse and gift. And sometimes, I think, the earth still remembers their devotion. When storms roll through old battlefields and the air grows thick with that metallic tang, maybe it is not just the rain. Maybe it is them, those forgotten men still walking through the fog, still following the scent, still making sure the dead are never truly lost. Before pews were polished, before choirs were orderly, before churches smelled of incense and wood polish, they smelled of life, dirty, loud animal life. In medieval and early modern Europe, worship was not as serene as you imagine. People brought their dogs to church. Strays wandered in through open doors. Some slept under pews, others barked during sermons, and occasionally they fought, snarling, growling, rolling in the dirt between prayers. It was holy chaos. And to restore divine order, the church employed one strange guardian, the dog whipper. His job was simple: keep God's house quiet. Picture him, a thin man in a rough wool coat, carrying a long whip in one hand and a forked stick in the other. The whip for scaring, the stick for catching. He would stand in the back of the church during Mass, eyes sharp, waiting. Then a bark, a yelp, a scuffle. He moves. The whip cracks once, echoing through the stone vaults like thunder. Heads turn. Silence returns. The priest continues. The dog whipper melts back into the shadows, invisible again, until the next disturbance. It sounds almost comic now, does not it? But there is something deeply human in that image. One man charged with holding back the chaos of the world so others could pretend it did not exist. He was not loved for it. Parishioners found him unsettling. His presence reminded them that even in the house of God, disorder lurked just beneath the hymns. The whip was both tool and symbol. Sometimes, they said, he grew too fond of it. The crack of leather became his own kind of liturgy. There is a story from Norfolk about a dog whipper who went mad after years of service. They found him one morning sitting in the empty church, whispering to himself, whip coiled around his hand. When asked what he was doing, he said, keeping them quiet. But the church was empty. Who, they asked. The souls, he answered. After that, they locked the church at night. No one wanted to see what he might be whipping in the dark. You might laugh, but perhaps he was not wrong. Every church was full of ghosts, of those buried beneath its floor, of those who prayed there for mercy and never found it. Maybe he heard what others could not. Maybe his whip was not meant for dogs at all. Still, by day he did his work faithfully. He walked the churchyard before every service, chasing out strays, cleaning the mess left by animals and people alike. He was the guardian of sacred cleanliness, the silent hand of discipline. His pay was small, his status lower still. Children mocked him. Priests tolerated him. But when he died, the dogs gathered at his grave and howled for 3 nights. Or so the legend says. The dog whipper lived in the borderland between reverence and ridicule. He was both servant and threat, a man who brought peace through fear. And is not that the oldest trick in religion? The whip hidden behind the hymn. The reminder that even holiness needs enforcement. In some towns his duties extended beyond dogs. He kept drunkards from stumbling into Mass, heretics from preaching too loud, lovers from whispering too close. A shepherd of obedience. A gatekeeper of grace. And like all gatekeepers, he was eventually replaced by rules, by architecture, by civility. But the need he filled never truly disappeared. There is still a dog whipper in every crowd, someone watching, waiting for you to make noise in the wrong place. Someone ready to restore silence. The name just changed. Now it is security, or moderator, or order. But the whip still cracks, even if you can't hear it. Sometimes when old churches creak in the wind, people swear they hear a faint snapping sound once, twice, then quiet. It is just the rafters, they say. But maybe it is him, still patrolling the aisles, still keeping the holy silence. And if you are ever alone in an empty cathedral, long after midnight, listen. The air feels thick, does not it? You think you hear breathing that is not yours. You tell yourself it is the echo of the city outside. Then comes a single sharp sound, crack, and every hair on your body stands up. Do not run. Just lower your voice. Some jobs never end, and the dog whippers is one of them. He is not cruel. He is not kind. He is just doing what he has always done, reminding you that even in the house of the divine, there is no such thing as perfect silence. Every civilization is built on skin, not the metaphorical kind, the literal one, leather. Before plastics, before factories, before the clean click of a polished shoe, there was the tanner. His trade clothed the world, armored armies and padded thrones. But to make something beautiful, he had to live among horror. Picture it, a medieval tannery on the edge of town, always downwind, because no one could bear the smell. The stench hit before you even saw the place, thick, sour and animal. The air trembled with flies. Dogs circled the gates. Inside, men worked half naked, their hands blackened, their clothes soaked in rot. Piles of animal hides lay stacked like corpses, stiff and pale. The process began with the flaying, removing the skin from slaughtered beasts, sometimes from carcasses already bloated. Then came the soaking, in vats of urine and dung, to soften the flesh. Yes, human urine. Collected from chamber pots, traded by the poor for a few coins. Pure collectors, they were called. Nothing pure about it. The tanners stirred the hides with long poles, wading barefoot through the filth when the poles broke. Their skin burned. Their lungs stung. But the work had to continue, because the city needed its leather, its belts, boots, armor, saddles, books. Every luxury was paid for in stench. The tanning yards were both factory and graveyard. The hides hissed in lime pits, white and bubbling like something alive. The tanners joked about the singing skins, the sound of trapped gas escaping as flesh broke down. The apprentices retched their first week. By the second, they stopped noticing. The human body adapts, after all, even to decay. And the tanners, they stopped smelling it altogether. Or maybe the smell became part of them. People said you could spot a tanner from a mile away. The scent clung to their hair, their homes, their children. No amount of washing erased it. They were necessary, yet untouchable, allowed to work, but forbidden from worshipping near others, marrying into certain families, or even living within city walls. Society demanded their craft, but despised their existence. Is not that always the way? We hide what disgusts us but cannot live without it. Some said the tanners were cursed, marked by the souls of the animals they flayed. At night the hides would twitch. Faces would form briefly in the stretched skin, mouthing silent protests. Just gases, the masters would say. Though even they avoided working after dark, a superstition took hold. Never whistle in a tannery at night, lest you invite something to whistle back. One story tells of a tanner in Rouen who ignored the rule. He was found the next morning floating in a vat of lime, skinless, eyes open, mouth still whistling through the foam. The others swore they heard it echoing for days. But fear could not stop the trade. Leather was life. The army needed armor. The merchants needed shoes. The priests needed bindings for their holy books. It was a dirty miracle, salvation wrapped in skin. The tanners knew this. Some took pride in it. We make the world durable, they would say, even if it rots us first. Their hands cracked and bled, the lime eating through flesh and bone. Some lost fingers. Some went blind from the fumes. And still they worked. Because the world above the stench never stopped demanding more. Every soft leather glove once passed through that hell. Every saddle that carried a king was born in a pit of piss. You can almost respect the honesty of it. The tanners did not pretend their world was clean. They lived in the truth that everything worth keeping costs something. That comfort at its core smells like death. In time, science replaced superstition, and tanneries moved behind closed doors. The smell diminished, but the idea remained. Industry born from decay, progress soaked in cruelty. Yet sometimes in old towns by the river, when fog drifts low and the air grows heavy, people still catch a faint sour odor that no one can trace. Locals call it the breath of the tanners. Maybe it is just methane rising from the mud. Or maybe the earth itself is remembering the men who worked its filth into form. Think about that the next time you slip on leather shoes or open a fine-bound book. You are touching ghosts, the remnants of animals, the sweat of men who lived unwanted yet essential lives. Every crease, every polished edge carries their labor. The tanners gave the world durability, and in return, the world forgot their names. But the smell never left. It waits, patient, ancient, reminding us that beauty is only ever one layer away from rot. Before the trill of alarms, before the hum of phones or the tick of bedside clocks, there was a sound that stirred cities awake, the tap-tap-tap of a long stick on glass. It came before dawn, sharp and rhythmic, echoing through the fog of the industrial age. That sound meant one thing: the knocker-up was doing his rounds. His job was simple: to wake the world. The workers in the mills, the miners, the factory hands, they all depended on him. For a few pennies a week, he made sure they rose before the whistle blew, before the foreman's wrath could fall. He carried with him a long pole tipped with wire or a soft knob, sometimes even a pea shooter, and he would tap on windows until he saw a shadow stir behind the curtain. No snooze button, no mercy. The city depended on his persistence. Imagine him walking through narrow cobbled streets under a sky the color of ash, his breath visible in the cold. Gas lamps flicker. The world still sleeps, but he is already working, a ghost in flat cap and scarf. He knows every house by heart, who wakes early, who sleeps heavy, who pays on time. Tap, tap, tap. Another soul dragged from dream into duty. Some say he never smiled. Others said he whistled to keep himself company, a tune that wandered between cheerful and eerie, like the sound of routine losing its mind. His clients trusted him more than they trusted themselves. In a world where being late meant losing everything, he was the fragile thread between survival and starvation. But who woke the knocker up? No one ever asked. Some claimed they never slept at all, that they were creatures of habit more than flesh, kept alive by purpose alone. The work was lonely, silent, repetitive. They saw the city in its most intimate moments, the vulnerable half-hour between night and morning, when the world forgets it is being watched. Through thin curtains they glimpsed lives half-dreamed, a woman adjusting her hair, a man clutching his chest from another sleepless night, children curled together for warmth. The knocker-up saw it all and kept it to himself. There is something haunting in that, is not there, to be everywhere, to touch so many lives, and yet remain invisible. He was the first sound people heard, and the last they wanted to remember. In some towns the job ran in families. A mother would knock for the mill workers while her son handled the docks. Generations raised on the sound of their own knocking. But time wears on even the most stubborn rituals. The work began to change them. Some grew obsessed, unable to stop even after the job ended. They would wake at 3, rise without thinking, and walk the same routes long after no one paid them. Neighbors would wake to tapping with no one at the window. The old man must have done it again, they would say, though he would been buried for months. Old habits, like old ghosts, do not rest easily. There are stories, whispered in northern England, about a certain knocker-up who worked the mills of Manchester. He was precise, never missed a soul. Then one winter a fire swept through the workers' quarters. He vanished that night, but the survivors swore they still heard his tapping the next morning. They said it guided them out before the flames reached the door. Coincidence, maybe. But ever since, on the anniversary of the fire, people hear the faint knock on their windows at dawn. No one's there, of course, just fog. Just memory. It is easy to dismiss it as wind or pipes, but deep down you know when a sound means something. The knocker-up was more than a job. He was a ritual, a heartbeat of discipline. Every tap was a reminder that time waits for no one, that sleep is a luxury the poor can't afford. It is strange how quickly we forget the hands that shaped our rhythm. The modern world still wakes by schedule, alarms, alerts, deadlines, but the spirit of the knocker-up lingers. The same quiet dread that hums when your phone buzzes at dawn. The same pulse that tells you to move, even when you are exhausted. You can almost hear it now. The soft, deliberate tapping somewhere outside your window. Once. Twice. Then silence. You tell yourself it is just a branch in the wind. But you feel it, the chill, the sense of being seen. Maybe it is nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, the knocker-up still walks. Not for money anymore, not for duty, but because the world never stopped needing to wake. There was a time when madness had a cure, or so they said. It was not found in medicine bottles or therapy rooms, but in the cold glint of steel. It was called the lobotomy, and standing beside the doctor who drove the instrument through the skull was a man, or sometimes a woman, whose hands trembled not from fear but from routine. The lobotomy assistant. They did not make the decisions. They made them happen. Picture a small white room in a 1940s hospital, the kind that smells of bleach and hopelessness. The walls are pale, the light too bright. A patient sits strapped to a chair, their eyes glassy with fear or chemicals. Beside them, the doctor hums softly, surgical pick in hand. The assistant prepares the tools, gauze, alcohol, a mallet. The sound of metal against tray rings sharp in the sterile air. No one speaks. The doctor asks for the orbitoclast. The assistant passes it. Then comes the hammer. 1, 2 taps through the thin bone of the eye socket. And just like that, the human mind is reduced to a circuit to be rewired. The assistant holds the head steady while the doctor moves the rod back and forth, severing connections, erasing memories, softening the soul. There, the doctor says. Calmer already. The patient drools. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they scream. The assistant wipes the blood away, whispers that it is over. But it never really is. Thousands underwent this miracle cure. Housewives, veterans, the depressed, the defiant. Anyone who made the world uncomfortable. And for every one of them, there was an assistant making sure the horror ran smoothly. They were told they were helping, that they were saving lives, but at night, when the hospital quieted and the corridors smelled of ether and regret, they wondered. The human skull is thin, too thin. You can feel the vibration of every strike through the fingertips. You can hear it echo inside your bones. Some assistants could not sleep without hearing it again. Tap. Crack. Silence. The sound became a lullaby of madness. Some grew numb. Others broke entirely. There is a story about a young assistant in Massachusetts who began hearing voices after years of work. She claimed she could hear the patients she would help, whispering through the walls. The doctors called it stress. The nurses called it guilt. She called it truth. One morning, she locked herself in the procedure room, placed the orbitoclast against her own eye and whispered, "I just want the noise to stop." It did. They found her calm at last. They buried her without ceremony. Another casualty of science's arrogance. The lobotomy era was an age of good intentions soaked in ignorance. The doctors believed they were curing pain. The world applauded them. Even Time magazine called it the operation of the century. No one saw the quiet hands beside the scalpel, the assistants who had to clean up the aftermath, the drooling bodies, the vacant stares, the patients who forgot their names but remembered the sound of the hammer. It is strange how quickly horror becomes procedure. The assistants became experts at small kindnesses, a gentle hand on the shoulder, a whispered apology no one else heard. They knew the truth, that this was not healing. It was silencing. And perhaps the cruelest part was how effective it seemed. Patients did become quiet, compliant. Their violent outbursts vanished, their minds blunted. To the world outside, that was progress. But the assistants saw the cost. They saw the lights dim behind the eyes. They watched the living turn into furniture. In some hospitals, the smell of alcohol and brain tissue mixed so thickly that workers claimed to taste it in their mouths for hours. Some wore masks not for safety, but to keep from vomiting. Others developed tremors that never left, as if their own nerves had absorbed the trauma they inflicted. And still they worked, because quitting meant failure. Or worse, replacement. So they learned to disconnect, just like the patients. Detached. Efficient. Silent. That is what horror does when it wears a white coat. It disguises itself as order. When the procedure finally fell out of favor, the doctors' names faded into infamy, but the assistants disappeared entirely. No memorials, no recognition, just empty charts and abandoned rooms. Sometimes those old hospitals still stand, their operating theaters sealed, their tools rusted but intact. Urban explorers tell stories, voices caught on tape, faint tapping sounds in the dark. Some say if you walk those halls at night, you will hear breathing from behind closed doors, steady and measured, as if someone is still holding a head in place. You might even hear a whisper, "Hold still. It will be over soon." Whether it is memory, guilt, or something else does not matter. The sound remains, because the lobotomy assistants were not monsters. They were believers. And belief, when misplaced, is the most dangerous tool of all. In the age before cameras, death did not end a story, it froze it. Families wanted to remember their loved ones as they were, or as they wished they had been. So when the final breath left a body, someone was called to capture what remained. That someone was the mourning portrait painter, The artist of silence. Picture the parlor of a Victorian home. Curtains drawn, mirrors covered, the air heavy with wax and lilies. In the center of the room lies the deceased, dressed in their finest clothes, skin pale but arranged to look almost peaceful. The painter arrives quietly, carrying brushes, pigments, and an expression that never changes. He greets no one with a smile. He sets up his easel beside the body and begins to work. Every stroke of his brush is both art and anatomy. He paints not from imagination, but from observation. He studies the shadows around the eyes, the color fading from the lips, the way death stiffens a smile. He paints quickly. Decomposition waits for no artist. The family stands nearby, whispering prayers or memories. Some weep, others watch, unable to look away. The painter never judges. He has seen too much for that. To him, this is not horror. It is routine. But even routine leaves a mark. Imagine spending every day in the company of corpses, coaxing life from their stillness. You start to forget which faces were sleeping and which would never wake again. Some painters confess that after years of work, they could not tell the living from the dead in their dreams. One artist from Boston wrote in his journal, "I sometimes fear I am painting them back to life." He was not entirely wrong. The mourning portrait was more than memory. It was a spell, a defiance of loss. To paint the dead was to say, "You are not gone yet." But every spell requires sacrifice, and this one demanded sanity. The painter had to see beauty in what others fled from. He had to spend hours studying the veins under translucent skin, the way the eyelids droop just enough to suggest rest. He became intimate with decay, sensitive to the smell of time. No perfume could mask it, the faint sweetness of rot hiding beneath rosewater. Some painters refused payment until the body was buried, afraid the dead might resent being turned into spectacle before they rested. Others worked by candlelight, their own shadows merging with the still form beside them. There is a story told among collectors of such portraits, about a painter who specialized in children. His works were astonishingly lifelike, almost too much so. Families claimed that at night their portraits' eyes seemed to glisten, their faces to shift as if the children were breathing again. The painter insisted he mixed a drop of the deceased's blood into his paint to capture their true essence. When he died, his studio was found full of unfinished canvases, faces half-formed, eyes staring from the dark. The air reeked of iron and turpentine. Some swear those portraits still whisper when the candles burn low. Of course, science laughs at such tales. But art has always walked hand in hand with the uncanny. To depict death is to invite it closer. Many painters found themselves haunted, not by ghosts, but by memory. They would wake in the middle of the night, seeing the faces they would painted glowing faintly in the moonlight, lips curling as if to thank or accuse them. Some drank to forget, others painted landscapes to escape. But even in those green meadows, the shadows of the dead lingered, subtle but unmistakable. The Victorians called these paintings memento mori, reminders of mortality. But for the painter, the reminder was constant. Every brushstroke whispered, "You too will one day be still." That awareness gave their work a strange tenderness. Look closely at an old mourning portrait, and you will notice it, the love hidden beneath precision, the tremor in the line of the mouth, the almost living gleam in the eye. That was the painter's rebellion against the inevitable. The mourning portrait painter did not just capture faces. He preserved moments, final breaths turned eternal. But time plays cruel tricks. Decades later, when photography replaced paint, the profession died quietly. Cameras could capture death faster, cheaper, without sentiment. The painters faded into history, their canvases locked in attics, their names forgotten. Yet the paintings remain, watching from dusty frames. Sometimes museum curators report strange things, portraits found slightly moved, expressions subtly altered. It is probably light. Probably. But if you stand before one long enough, you might notice something impossible. The faintest fog forming inside the glass, as if someone behind it just sighed. Perhaps it is the painter, still trapped in his art, still reaching for a face he can never finish. Or perhaps it is the subject, grateful or furious for being remembered. Either way, when you visit an old portrait gallery and the air turns cold, do not worry. It is only history breathing. Just remember not to look too long into those painted eyes. They were never meant to look back. Before machines could think, before alarms and sensors warned of danger, miners trusted something far smaller, far more fragile, a tiny bird. The canary. Its bright yellow feathers were a promise of life in a world made of darkness. And there was one person whose duty it was to keep those fragile lives alive, the mine canary keeper. Picture a coal mine in the early 1900s. The air is thick, humid, laced with invisible poisons. The men descend before dawn, their lamps bobbing like fallen stars. The keeper walks among them, carrying cages that glow faintly in the lamplight, each one trembling with the heartbeat of a bird. He is not a miner, not really, but everyone knows him. He holds life in his hands, their lives. The canaries are more than pets. They are prophets. When methane or carbon monoxide fills the tunnels, the birds will sing faster, flutter, then fall silent before the men even feel their throats tighten. That silence is their warning. The keeper's job is to listen for it. Imagine the pressure, hundreds of lives depending on the breath of a creature that weighs less than a handful of coal dust. He moves through the tunnels, checking cages, whispering to the birds. Some say the canaries loved him, chirping only for his voice. Others said he never spoke above a whisper, afraid to waste the air. When a bird collapsed, he knew what it meant. He would shout out, and the miners would run, coughing, scrambling for the ladders before the gas reached them. Sometimes they made it, sometimes they did not. And when the coughing stopped and the echo faded, he would be left alone with the silence, the heavy kind that feels alive. He would kneel beside the little cage, open the door, and lift the tiny body in both hands. If he was lucky, a bit of fresh air would revive it. If not, he would place it gently in a small wooden box. Every dead canary meant lives saved, but the keeper never celebrated. The miners would clap him on the back, thank him, even joke about giving him a raise. But when night fell, he buried the birds one by one behind the mine, tiny graves for unseen heroes. "You breathed for us," he would whisper. "We will remember." But of course, no one really did. The mine canary keeper existed in the same darkness as his birds, essential but invisible. Even above ground, he could not shake the smell of the mines, the coal dust embedded in his skin. He carried cages like a priest carries relics, careful, reverent. Each morning he would check his flock, wipe their feathers clean, and pray they would never have to die for him again. There is a story from Wales about a keeper named Lou, who worked the same pit for 30 years without losing a man. The miners said he had a gift, that he could sense the gas before the canaries did. He laughed when they said it, but when asked how he knew, he would just tap his chest and say, "You can feel death before you smell it." One day, a new owner decided the canaries were outdated, too sentimental, too primitive. They installed mechanical sensors instead. Lou was retired with a small pension. A month later, the mine exploded, killing 47 men. The sensors had failed. The locals swore that days before, people had heard birdsong from the closed shafts at night. They said it was not the canaries, it was Lou, walking again with his cages, warning them too late. The story became folklore, but the truth behind it lingers. The keeper's role was not just practical, it was human. He gave the miners something to believe in, something to love in a place built for fear. Down there, surrounded by rock and silence, that chirping meant hope. Maybe that is why they called him Guardian of the Breath. The title sounds almost holy, does not it? In a way, it was. He watched over the thing everyone took for granted, the air itself. When the world above thrived on smoke and progress, the men below learned to measure life by the flutter of wings. Think about that for a moment. Every time you inhale, somewhere in history, a little bird died to prove that you could. The canaries eventually vanished from the mines, replaced by sensors, machines, and algorithms. The keepers vanished too, their names unrecorded, their graves unmarked. Yet sometimes when miners dig into old sealed shafts, they report strange things, a faint chirping echoing through the dark, a whisper of song where no bird could survive. It is just air moving through the vents, they say. But deep down, they know. The mines remember their guardian. The breath of those who listened still lingers. So tonight, as you sit in your warm, bright room, take a deep breath. Feel the air fill your lungs. It is easy to forget that someone once risked everything to make sure you could. Listen closely. In the hum of your fan, in the rhythm of your heartbeat, there is a faint echo of wings. The canaries are still singing. They always were. Before technology conquered sleep, before alarms shrieked and phones buzzed, there were voices in the dark, real ones. They came at the edge of morning, soft but insistent, calling names through half-open windows. Those voices belonged to the human alarm clocks. They were not like the knocker-ups who tapped on glass with sticks. No, these were the singers of waking, the shouters of time, the men and women who used their own lungs to drag the world out of dreams. Their call was not mechanical, it was intimate. You paid them to know your schedule, your habits, your weaknesses. Mr. Turner, 4 of the clock sharp. Mrs. Davies, rise and shine. Each call was personal, almost tender, but beneath it was urgency, because in the factories of the industrial age, sleep was sin. Picture it. A cobblestone street glistening with rain, lamps still burning low, the city caught between night and day. The human alarm clock moves quickly, scarf pulled to his mouth against the chill, notebook in hand. He stops beneath a window, checks his pocket watch and shouts just loud enough to wake one soul, but not the neighbor next door. It is a strange art, knowing how to wake without disturbing. Some used ladders, others stood on crates. A few carried whistles or horns for the heavy sleepers. The job required precision, patience, and a voice that could pierce fog. Too early, and you would lose clients. Too late, and they would lose their jobs. In those narrow hours before dawn, he was the heartbeat of the city. People trusted his voice more than they trusted the sun. But who woke him? That question always lingers, does not it? The truth is, no one did. Most human alarm clocks barely slept. They lived in the rhythm of other people's mornings, never their own. When their rounds ended, the world came alive, the baker opened his shop, the bells chimed, the streets filled, and the shouter disappeared into bed, unseen, unheard, forgotten. Their voices started the day, but did not belong to it. They were like ghosts of discipline, fading as soon as light touched the windows. There is a strange kind of poetry in that, a life measured not in hours, but in awakenings. Yet repetition erodes even the strongest spirits. Over time, some human alarm clocks began to hear echoes when no one was around. They would be walking home after their routes and swear they heard themselves shouting from a distance. The same tone, the same words. One man from Leeds claimed his own voice started answering back, asking him who would wake him when it was his turn to sleep forever. He quit the next day, though the neighbors said they still heard his call for weeks after he vanished. Just the wind, they said. But the wind does not remember names. The work was lonely. The city was vast and dawn was cruel. Yet for all their isolation, these people were trusted more than anyone else. A late call could cost someone their job, their rent, their family's meal. So the human alarm clock carried the weight of hundreds of lives each morning, knowing none of those lives would ever remember his face. History does not write about people like that. It writes about inventors, not caretakers of time. But if you listen carefully, you can still feel their presence. The phrase wake-up call comes from them. It still carries that sting of command, that whisper of someone else's breath breaking your sleep. And sometimes it feels almost alive, does not it? The way your alarm startles you, the way it seems to know exactly when to pierce the dream. It is mechanical, yes, but the timing feels human. Maybe that is because it is. Because somewhere in the circuitry of habit, the ghosts of those voices remain. Up you get. It is time. Do not be late. Each echo a memory of someone who shouted life into motion. There is a story about a woman in Manchester who worked as a human alarm clock for 20 years. They said her voice could cut through anything, rain, thunder, even nightmares. She kept a list of every name she would ever woken. Thousands. When she retired, she burned the list and went to bed early for the first time in decades. She never woke up. Her neighbors claimed that at dawn, just as the light touched her window, they heard her voice one last time, "Good morning." The church bells rang a minute later. Coincidence? Maybe. But in the years that followed, whenever someone moved into her old flat, they would swear they heard faint knocking or a distant call before sunrise. It is just the plumbing, the landlord said. But the tenants always left. We like to think we control time now, but we do not. We still bow to the same rhythm the human alarm clocks once ruled, the rhythm of necessity, of obedience. We wake not because we are ready, but because something demands we must. So tomorrow, when your alarm goes off and your body protests, do not curse it too harshly. Somewhere, in the hum between sleep and waking, there is still a voice whispering your name. Maybe it is habit. Maybe it is history. Or maybe, just maybe, it is someone from long ago, still keeping time, still refusing to rest. Long before dentists had drills, gloves, or mercy, there were the tooth pullers, traveling showmen who mixed medicine with theater, pain with applause. They did not work in clinics or hospitals. Their stage was the market square, their music the screams of the desperate. Imagine a bustling fairground in 17th century Europe, jugglers, fire-eaters, pickpockets, and in the middle of it all, a wooden platform draped with red cloth. A man stands atop it wearing bright clothes, a feathered hat, and a grin wide enough to make you uneasy. He calls himself a doctor, though the only diploma he owns is a blood-stained rag. Beside him, a small table gleams with tools, hooks, pliers, tongs, all gleaming in the sun. Behind him, his assistant plays a drum to draw the crowd. The tooth puller bows theatrically and shouts, "Ladies and gentlemen, witness the miracle of modern medicine." Then he gestures toward his next patient, a farmer clutching his jaw, face swollen, eyes wild with pain. There is no anesthesia, no clean instruments, no reassurance. Just the promise of relief. The crowd leans in, fascinated, horrified. The puller chats casually with his victim, cracking jokes, sometimes flirting with the audience. "Do not worry," he laughs. "I have done this 1,000 times, and only lost a few heads." The drum rolls. The crowd laughs nervously. Then he grabs the pliers. One sharp twist. A crack. A sound no one ever forgets. Blood sprays onto the cloth, the farmer screams, and the crowd roars with delight. The tooth puller holds up the bloody tooth like a trophy, waving it triumphantly before tossing it into a jar. "Another soul freed from agony," he shouts. The audience claps. The farmer, dizzy and bleeding, stumbles away, lighter by one tooth and a few coins. The show moves on. There is always another mouth to fix. Always another fool willing to pay. It sounds barbaric, but in a world without real dentists, they were the only hope. Pain was universal. The tooth puller simply gave it a stage. Some were con men, extracting perfectly good teeth to sell as relics. Others were legitimate tradesmen, hardened by years of practice. They carried their trade from town to town, often doubling as barbers, surgeons, or apothecaries. Their carts smelled of mint and blood. Children both feared and adored them. The bravest boys would sneak close just to see the tooth jar, the grim collection of their village's suffering. But there was always something unsettling about the pullers. Their laughter never seemed genuine. Their hands were too steady, their eyes too eager. Some said they fed on pain, that the crowd's applause was just noise to mask what they truly loved, the moment of the scream. There is a legend from France about one such puller named Armand, known for his uncanny precision. He never missed, never flinched. But he also never charged. "Pain is its own payment," he would say. One night, during a storm, he set up his stage in an abandoned square. A few curious souls gathered under umbrellas to watch. He called for a volunteer. A woman stepped forward, pale, trembling, her veil dripping with rain. Armand bowed deeply and reached for his tools, but before he could begin, the woman whispered something. No one heard the words, but they say his face went white. He dropped his pliers, turned, and fled into the storm. The next morning they found his cart overturned, his instruments scattered. Every tooth in his jar had turned black. As for Armand, he was never seen again. Some say he would finally met a patient who knew his real name, the one he would sold long ago to buy his unerring hands. History, of course, dismisses such tales, but I like to think there is truth buried in every myth. Pain, after all, remembers. Even today, the image of the tooth puller lingers, part comedy, part horror. Early dentists adopted their theatrics, their bravado, even their stage presence. The difference is only in polish. We have sanitized the spectacle, replaced the blood with fluoride, the screaming with suction. But if you have ever sat in a dentist chair, heart pounding at the high whine of the drill, you have felt the echo of that square, that crowd, that awful anticipation. The modern clinic is just quieter theater. The pliers are smaller, the lighting better, but the ritual remains unchanged. Someone opens their mouth. Someone else takes control. And beneath the hum of machinery, the ghost of laughter still lingers. Next time you tilt your head back under the dentist's bright light and hear the click of metal, remember the tooth pullers. Remember the stage, the drum, the crowd leaning forward. Because the truth is, every smile ever restored carries a little of their madness. The price of relief has always been the same, it just hurts in cleaner rooms now. There is a sound you do not forget, the hollow scrape of metal against brick, the muffled cough echoing from deep inside a chimney. That was the music of the industrial age. And the ones making it were not men. They were boys. Tiny, wiry, filthy boys with hands too small to hold a future. They were called the chimney sweep boys, and they cleaned the fires of the rich by crawling straight into hell. Picture London in the early 1800s, fog clinging to the streets, coal smoke turning the air into soup. Every home had a chimney, and every chimney needed cleaning, or the soot would choke the fire or the family. Machines could not do it, not yet. So they sent in children, some as young as 5. The master sweep would wake them before dawn, toss them a brush, a scraper, and a burlap sack, then send them up into the narrow black flue. The boys stripped naked to keep from catching on the rough bricks. Sometimes they smeared soot on their bodies first, less painful than raw scrapes. Then on command, they would climb. Knees, elbows, lungs, all grinding against the brick. The shaft grew tighter the higher they went. Some got stuck, wedged between walls. When that happened, the master did not climb up to help. He lit a fire below. The smoke either forced the boy up or killed him. They called it encouragement. The soot turned their skin gray, their eyes red, their coughs permanent, their tiny lungs filled with ash, their bones bent from malnutrition. And yet each time they emerged trembling, gasping, covered in filth, the masters clapped them on the back and said, "Good lad. Tomorrow, higher." Some never came back out. Their bodies were found days later, jammed like plugs in the chimney, limbs stiff, faces black with soot and fear. They called those boys clinkers. The city burned their bodies quietly, then hired replacements. Life was cheap. Soot was eternal. Still, there were those who survived long enough to tell the tale. One boy, Tom, 15 but looked 10, wrote that he dreamed in gray. "Even the air feels black," he said. "When I breathe, it tastes like fire." He had scars across his ribs from where he would been scraped out of a chimney with a hook. But he kept climbing. What else could he do? No one wanted a grown sweep. Once you got too big, you were discarded, just another lump of soot in the system. It is strange how the dirtiest work was always done by the smallest hands. The city looked at them and saw tools, not children. Yet they were the reason fires burned safely, why homes stayed warm. The irony is cruel. The same people who clucked their tongues at child labor were the ones who hired them in secret, because soot does not wait for morality. There are darker stories too, whispered by older sweeps, the ones who lived long enough to lose their lungs. They said that sometimes, when a boy died in the flue, his spirit stayed. That on quiet nights, you could hear scratching in the walls, long after the house was empty. The soot remembers, they would say. It clings. Maybe it was just guilt. Maybe it was something else. Chimneys, after all, are strange places, dark tunnels where fire and air make uneasy peace. The perfect home for a ghost. When the laws finally changed and the use of child sweeps was banned, no one celebrated. The masters just switched to new tricks, using brushes, machines, or older boys desperate enough to pretend they were children again. Progress, they called it. But progress has a short memory. Even now, the image of the chimney sweep boy survives in paintings and stories as a symbol of luck, of charm. People hire them for weddings, as if a child who crawled through fire for a living could bless a union. It is grotesque, is not it, to turn tragedy into superstition, to pretend soot can bring fortune when it only ever took it away. Sometimes, when I walk through old London streets, I look up at the narrow chimneys crowding the skyline and wonder how many of them were graves, how many breaths ended halfway to daylight. And then, sometimes, when the wind blows just right, there is a faint smell, not of coal or smoke, but something sharper, almost human. The scent of skin burned too young. The city does not talk about it, but it knows. The soot in the bricks, the ash in the mortar, it remembers. It always does. So tonight, if you hear scratching inside your walls, do not panic. Do not light a fire. Just listen. Maybe it is the wind. Maybe it is the house settling. Or maybe, just maybe, it is one of them, still climbing, still reaching for the sky they were never allowed to see. In the quiet valleys of old Wales and the misted borders of England, there was a man who feasted for the dead. They called him the Sin Eater. When someone died burdened with unconfessed sins, when no priest could cleanse their soul, the family summoned him. He came not dressed in robes but in rags, hungry, hollow-eyed, and silent. His duty was sacred and profane. He would eat the sins of the deceased so their soul could ascend clean. Imagine it. A small cottage, candles flickering, the corpse laid out on a wooden table. The family stands apart, crossing themselves, whispering prayers they barely believe will work. And then the door creaks open. The sin eater enters. He does not look at them. He looks only at the dead. A loaf of bread is placed on the chest, a bowl of ale or wine beside it. He sits down, head bowed. For a moment, there is silence. Then he begins to eat. Slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with the still face beneath him. Each bite is a ritual, each swallow an absolution. When he is done, he drains the cup, wipes his mouth, and whispers the ancient words, "I have eaten your sins. You are clean." Then he leaves, unthanked, unpaid except for a few coins and the weight of another soul pressing into his own. The family breathes easier. The priest pretends not to know. And the sin eater walks back into the dark, carrying everything they feared to face. The belief was simple: sin was substance. It could be absorbed, transferred. And for generations, these lonely men took the world's filth into themselves, one funeral at a time. But purity has a price. Over years, the sin eaters changed. Some said their eyes darkened, that their skin grew pale as candle wax. Others claimed they began to smell faintly of decay, like the boundary between life and death had worn thin. They avoided mirrors. Animals avoided them too. Dogs would snarl, birds would scatter, milk would curdle in their presence. They were treated as outcasts, shunned by the same people who summoned them. Better to touch the grave, villagers whispered, than the man who eats it. Yet still they came when death did, because no one else would do what he did. There is a story of one sin eater, Thomas Pritchard, who was called to a manor after the death of a cruel landlord. The family insisted on a grand ceremony, all pomp and prayer. But when Thomas began to eat, he stopped halfway through, trembling. The bread in his hand turned black. He dropped it and gasped, "This one's sins are too many." The family cursed him, accused him of witchcraft. But before dawn, every candle in the manor went out, and the body was found face down on the floor, the bread gone. "He took it back," Thomas whispered. The dead ate themselves. After that, he vanished into the hills. People said he would grown tired of carrying what was not his. Some say he still wanders the Welsh mountains, thin as shadow, whispering apologies to no one. Others say he died long ago, and that the crows who linger on church roofs are his descendants, still hungry, still waiting. The church despised sin eaters, of course. To them, it was heresy, a theft of divine authority. But the people did not care about theology. They cared about peace. When your child died in sin, you wanted to believe someone could save them, even if it meant damnation for another. The sin eater became both savior and scapegoat, Christ and devil in the same breath. And he knew it. He accepted it. Because somewhere inside him was a strange kind of mercy. He understood that the world would rather hate him than face its own corruption. So he let them. That is what makes the story so tragic. These were not demons. They were people who carried the moral garbage of society so everyone else could feel clean. Sound familiar? We still have sin eaters today, just not with bread and ale. They are the ones who handle what no one wants to touch, the guilty, the dying, the condemned. Every age finds someone to absorb the sins it can't bear. But in those dark cottages, the ritual was literal. You could smell it, the bread warm from the corpse's chest, the faint metallic tang of death mixed with ale. You could hear the swallowing, the soft murmur of prayers half remembered. The family would avert their eyes, afraid to see the transaction take place. Because once he began eating, it was not symbolic anymore. It was real. They said the sin eater's tongue grew numb, his dreams crowded with faces of the damned. He would wake choking, his throat raw from unseen hands. One old tale says that when a sin eater dies, a black bird appears at the window of every home he ever visited, tapping 3 times before flying away. A reminder that sin, like hunger, is never truly satisfied. Tonight, if you ever feel the air grow heavy in a silent room, if you catch the scent of stale bread and ale with no source, do not be afraid. Or do, depending on what you have done. Because it might be nothing. Or it might be him, sitting quietly in the corner waiting for his next meal. There was a time when being buried alive was not a fear, it was a possibility. Doctors were not sure where death truly began, and coffins were not always as final as they seemed. Bells were installed above graves, strings tied to wrists, and guards were hired to keep watch for movement below. They called them resurrection waiters, men paid to sit among the dead and listen for anyone who was not quite done dying. Picture a misty graveyard at the edge of a Victorian town, the air cold enough to make the lantern flame shiver. The waiter sits beside a fresh mound of earth, wrapped in a wool coat, flask in hand, eyes red from sleeplessness. Around him, the graves are silent but not peaceful. Each one has a thin cord leading from the coffin below to a small brass bell mounted above. A tangle of strings against the moonlight, an orchestra of fear. His job to sit, to wait, and to listen. The night stretches endlessly. The only sounds are the wind through grass, the drip of condensation, and sometimes something else. A faint rustle, a muffled thump, the whisper of movement from below. Most nights it is nothing, rats, roots shifting, imagination gnawing at sanity. But once in a while the bell rings. Just once. A sharp metallic note that cuts through the fog like a heartbeat. The waiter freezes. His pulse quickens. He waits for it again. Then, ding. He exhales, curses, and grabs his spade. He digs fast, faster than thought, until the wood of the coffin appears. The nails come loose. The lid creaks open. And sometimes the person inside gasps, eyes wide, skin pale as death but alive. Saved. Reborn. The waiter pulls them free, wraps them in a blanket, whispers, "You made it, love. You made it." But other times, when the bell rings and he digs, there is nothing inside but a body still and stiff. The cord tied to the wrist pulled taut. Maybe it was just the settling of flesh, the twitch of gases, the echo of decay pretending to live. He fills the grave again, quieter this time, and does not speak of it. Because the truth is, he does not always know which is worse, the silence or the sound. The resurrection waiters worked in shifts, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. The pay was miserable. The company, worse. Cemeteries were not empty. There were thieves who came at night to rob graves, doctors looking for fresh corpses for study, and things even the waiters could not name. They carried pistols for the living, crosses for the dead, and whiskey for everything in between. Imagine sitting there hour after hour, surrounded by names carved into stone, knowing that one of them might start calling yours. It does things to a man. Some began to hear bells that were not there. Some swore they saw dirt moving where no cords were tied. One waiter from Glasgow claimed he saw a hand break through the soil, white, grasping, and when he ran to help it vanished. The ground swallowed it, he said, trembling. No one believed him, but after that, no one would take his shift either. Eventually, he stopped showing up. His replacement found his coat folded neatly by a grave with no name, the lantern still burning beside it. The bell above that grave was missing. The practice of bell graves faded with time, replaced by better medicine, better certainty. But the fear never left us, did it, even now? People are buried with pacemakers, heart monitors, even GPS trackers, just in case. And when someone dreams of being trapped in a box, gasping for air, psychologists call it anxiety. But maybe it is something older, ancestral memory from a time when the line between life and death was a blur drawn by candlelight. The resurrection waiters were guardians of that line, sitting in the cold, listening for proof that the world still made mistakes. Their ears belonged to the dead, their hearts to the living. They were witnesses to the terror of false endings. And though their profession is gone, their vigil is not. In some forgotten cemeteries, on nights when the fog hangs low and the air feels too thick, people still report hearing bells. Not the church kind, the small, delicate tinkle of metal barely brushing against metal. It stops when you listen too closely. It starts again when you walk away. Maybe it is the wind. Maybe it is something buried deeper than sound. If you ever find yourself in an old graveyard at night and hear that faint ringing, do not answer it. Do not touch the cord. Just step back slowly and leave. Because somewhere beneath the soil, something might still be waiting to wake. He came when hope had already left. The air reeked of rot. The streets were empty except for the sound of wheels carrying bodies, and still, people opened their doors when they saw him, because he was the only one who came close. The plague doctor. The figure of nightmares, yes, but once he was salvation. Imagine the 14th century, a city under siege, not by armies but by invisible death. The plague crept like smoke through alleys, curling into lungs, painting skin with blackened bruises. Bells tolled, fires burned, prayers failed. And then through the fog a shape appeared, a long coat of oiled leather, gloves, boots, a wide-brimmed hat, and that mask. The beak. Long and hollow, stuffed with herbs, rosemary, mint, lavender, to ward off the stench of decay and they believed the disease itself. He looked like a bird from some unholy dream, the crow that heralded the end of things. Children hid behind shutters. Adults crossed themselves. But when the coughing began, when the sores burst and the fever rose, they called for him anyway. The plague doctor entered homes no priest dared to visit. He touched the dying. He examined the bodies. He marked the doors. His stick, a long wooden rod, kept distance between him and the afflicted, but not enough to spare him the smell. The air inside was thick, wet, human. He would poke, prod, record symptoms, drain the swellings, prescribe leeches, or burn herbs in bowls to cleanse the air. He knew it would not work. He did it anyway, because doing something was better than nothing. He wrote notes in careful Latin, the ink trembling as he coughed into his own mask. The pay was good. Doctors earned small fortunes during plague years, but most did not live to spend it. And yet more came. More men donned the black armor of medicine, walking among corpses like living omens. They were feared and needed, reviled and revered. The mask was meant for protection, but it became a symbol of terror. People swore that when you saw the crow in the street, it meant someone in your house would die within the week. Some said the eyes behind the glass glowed red at night, that the doctors were not human at all, but spirits feeding on death. And when one finally died, no one dared touch the body. They burned the suit where it fell. But not every story was hopeless. Some plague doctors stayed with their patients until the end, holding their hands as they faded, whispering prayers even when their own lungs began to fail. One in Venice was found sitting upright in a chair, surrounded by the dead he would try to save. His mask was still on, his book open, the last words written, still breathing. They buried him with honor, but not gratitude. Gratitude never survives grief. Over time, the mask evolved from tool to relic, from relic to legend. Artists painted it, poets feared it, and even now, centuries later, it returns to us on costumes in horror films, in festivals, a grotesque echo of a time when science and superstition were one and the same. But what most forget is this: the beak was not for decoration. Inside, beneath the herbs, some plague doctors hid sponges soaked in vinegar or urine. They truly believed the smell could block out death. It did not, of course, but the human mind will cling to any illusion if it means survival. Maybe that is what makes the image so haunting. It is not the mask itself, it is what it represents, desperation dressed as hope. There is a rumor from Marseille, told in whispers by gravediggers, of a doctor who refused to die. They said he kept walking long after the plague was gone, long after the city was clean. His coat never aged, his gloves never tore. When people asked where he came from, he would simply tilt his head, the glass eyes reflecting their faces, and say, "I go where the air still stinks." Then he would vanish into the fog. Even today, travelers claim that during outbreaks, smallpox, cholera, even modern plagues, someone fitting his description appears in the corners of photographs, standing just behind the crowd. Always watching, always waiting. Perhaps it is just coincidence. Or maybe death keeps its own physicians. And if that thought unsettles you, good. It should. Because the truth is, the plague doctor was not a monster. He was human, fragile, foolish, compassionate to the point of madness. He walked willingly into contagion, hoping the herbs in his mask would save him from what he could not understand. The world calls him grim, but I call him brave. He did not run from death. He met it face to face, dressed like a crow, pretending he could bargain. And maybe, in a way, he did. Because centuries later, we still talk about him. Still remember his shape, his beak, his silent vigil through the streets of the dying. Maybe that is his immortality. And maybe, just maybe, when the air grows foul again, and the sirens replace the bells, and fear tastes metallic on your tongue, you will feel him nearby. Watching, waiting, checking if you are still breathing. Every story ends in the same place, under soil, beneath stone, in silence. And someone has to make room for that ending. The priest gives the words, the mourners give the tears, but it is the gravedigger who gives the space. He is the first to arrive, and the last to leave. When death visits a town, he is already waiting. Picture it, dawn breaking pale over a fog-covered cemetery, the mist curling between crooked crosses. A lone figure moves slowly among them, shovel in hand, boots heavy with dew. The gravedigger hums softly, a tune without melody as he works the earth loose. He does not rush. The ground has its rhythm. Each shovel stroke is measured, precise, as if he is cutting through time itself. Some graves are fresh, others old enough that the names on their stones have blurred into moss. But he knows them all. He remembers where each one lies, who they were, who came to visit and who never did. He remembers the voices that once filled the air. Now only the crows speak. He is not a morbid man. Death to him is work, familiar as breathing. He sharpens his shovel the way a carpenter sharpens a blade. He wipes the sweat from his brow and leans on the handle, watching the sunrise spill gold across the tombstones. Another day, he murmurs. Another home built. Because that is what it is in his eyes, a home. A resting place. The world above forgets that. They see him as grim, superstitious, unlucky. They cross themselves when he walks by, whisper that he smells of death. But he does not mind. He knows what they do not, that death is not cruel. It is just hungry, and he is merely the one who feeds it. There is a strange peace to his life. The dead do not lie. They do not gossip or scheme. They do not break promises. They simply stay. The living, though, they come crying, bargaining, pretending to believe in heaven while staring at the hole he has dug. He has seen every kind of grief, the quiet sobs, the violent wails, the ones who laugh because the body has not caught up with the heart yet. He has seen lovers toss rings into graves, seen mothers collapse onto coffins, seen old men stand without moving as if waiting to follow. And through it all, he keeps his distance. His job is not to feel. It is to prepare. Yet sometimes at night, when the cemetery is still, he talks to them. Not prayers, just conversation. "You had a big crowd today, Mrs. Bell," he will say. Or, "No one came for you, old friend. That is a shame." He pours a bit of his drink on the soil for company. He laughs softly at his own jokes. The dead do not answer, of course, but they listen. He is sure of it. There is an old superstition that gravediggers never fall ill. That death out of respect passes them by. Maybe it is true. Maybe it is because they have already made their peace. The gravedigger is not afraid of his own grave. He has been digging it for years, in his mind. He knows exactly where he will lie, under the willow near the east wall, where the morning sun touches first. Good light for sleeping, he says. Sometimes, though, things happen even he can't explain. He has felt the ground shift underfoot when no one else is near. He has heard faint knocking from coffins long buried, even after the resurrection waiters were gone. Once he found a grave he did not remember digging, fresh soil, a simple cross, no name. The next day, a body was brought to him, unclaimed, the right size, the right weight. He said nothing, just nodded and lowered it in. The earth always knows before we do. Over time he begins to see patterns, the way the wind changes before a funeral, the way crows gather on certain stones days in advance. He swears he can smell death on people, a faint sweetness like turned fruit. Sometimes he warns them. "Take it easy," he will say. "You look pale." They always laugh. A few weeks later, he digs their hole. "I told you," he mutters, laying the first shovel of dirt. He is not cruel about it, just honest. That is what death deserves, honesty. The gravedigger's world is small, but it is deep. He is the last to hold the dead before the earth claims them, the final touch in a chain of goodbyes. He has seen priests lose faith, soldiers return missing pieces of themselves, children leave toys beside stones too tall for their height. He has watched lovers grow old visiting the same grave until one day they stop coming. And when they do, he digs again, placing them beside the one they could not forget. It is quiet work, but not lonely. Not really. Because death for him is not an ending. It is continuity. The earth takes, the grass grows, the living mourn, and the dead keep listening. He keeps digging. That is how the world stays balanced. They say you can tell a good gravedigger by the shape of the mounds he leaves behind. Flat, even, as if he is tucking the dead in gently. A bad one leaves them jagged, careless. The gravedigger takes pride in his craft. Everyone deserves a clean bed, he says. He is not wrong. There is a kind of love in that labor, quiet and unspoken. At the end of his days, when his hands are too weak to hold the shovel, he will rest beneath the soil he has turned for everyone else. Maybe the next digger will pause, tip his hat, and whisper, "He built good homes." And that will be enough. Because that is what the gravedigger really is, the keeper of endings, the builder of forever. So the next time you walk past a graveyard and feel a chill that is not from the wind, tip your head. Someone's working there unseen. Someone who is given every ending a place to rest. And so the last shovel falls, the final tale buried among centuries of strange, horrifying work. From the body snatchers to the plague doctors, from those who dug for gold to those who dug for grace, each one lived in the shadow of necessity. They carried the weight of progress, of survival, of sin, so the rest of us could sleep a little easier. So if you have made it this far, thank you. Tell me, which story haunted you most? Which job would you never dare to take, even if it meant saving your life? Leave your thoughts below. I will be reading, quietly, from the dark between stories.